95% of people are actually living on the bank of suffering and despair. Are you one of them? Hi, I'm Jennifer Evans with Empowering Wellness Counseling Solutions, and we're talking about the river of life metaphor. In my sessions, I often share about this river of life and how it explains equanimity. 95% of the decisions we make are implicit, leading us to the bank of suffering and despair. On the river of life, this metaphor that I use for equanimity, this sense of mindfulness and balance. And equanimity really buys into this idea that the one thing that we need to start to radically accept in order to understand that grief is a journey to acceptance, not suffering and despair, is that life is chaotic. That for all the destruction the chaos makes, there's also these very, very beautiful, miraculous, serendipitous things that happen. And so we harness this idea of balance between this chaos of good and evil, of yin and yang, of positive and negative energy. And so as we look at the river of life, we say that we can't control the current and we can't control the weather, but we can control if we're in the boat and what bank we're getting off on. And as I said, 95% of the time, we get off on the bank of suffering and despair. And we'll talk a little bit later, so hang out to learn what it looks like and are you on the bank of suffering and despair. And every once in a while, we are grounded. We are looking all around. We're seeing everything that is out there. We are zoomed out, zoomed in, find a focal point. And we get on the bank of value, strength building, and growth. And on that bank, we build a village. And so we can also be on the boat. And the boat is more of suffering and despair, but really just kind of getting into this perceived control feedback looping. And we just kind of expect life to be hard, so we just stay hard. And on the bank of suffering and despair, we have a village, or we have a hut. We have a fire, we have food, we know that food's going to come. But yet we feel like the other shoe is going to drop. But yet we put locks on our doors and our coolers. But yet we pull our food up into the trees so the bears don't eat it. But yet, we keep doing things that is slowly reducing our presence and our value for ourselves and where we are. And that is the bank of suffering and despair. We actually are living life, and why 95% of people do this. We are actually living life, and we can see the external validators. We live life through our achievements. We create an identity through our achievements. But that's creating an emptiness inside. And as it creates an emptiness inside, we're missing a lot of opportunities for our own personal growth and our own personal success and our own personal meaningful connection. On the bank of suffering and despair is trauma bonding. It is. It's finding people that despite they love, despite we connect. It's these little tiny words that we use that minimize and reduce our presence and maximizes and really leans into other people's presence. And so how we get over to the bank of value, strength building, and growth is the idea equanimity. It's mindfulness. It's being present. It's looking at the entire situation as a whole. And as you look at the entire situation as a whole, you are engaging in meaningful, purposeful acts that is feeding your own value, your own purpose. And as you do that, as you make decisions related to your values and your purpose, you find that the only decisions you make are those for your value and your purpose. And as you are doing these things, you're starting to build that village. I talk a lot about these processes and outcomes, and we can't control outcomes, but we can control processes. The processes is getting over to the bank of value, strength building, and growth. The process is building the village. You can't control whether or not anybody will live in your village, and it's not about how many people are in your village. It's how prosperous the village is by having the representation that is needed to create fulfillment of that village and the people in it. And fulfillment of the village and people in it is this idea that we have educators, we have mentors, we have mentees. We are constantly growing in our awareness and connection with ourselves and our surroundings and the purpose and value as a whole for that community. And so some of the things that we're doing is taking consistent action aligned with values, even when it's difficult. Engaging in practices that really build physical, emotional, and spiritual strength. Seeking learning opportunities and embracing challenges as growth. Contributing to others' well-being while maintaining healthy boundaries. We're growing in our sense of inner stability, even during external challenges. It's important that we are growing from the inside out. The people on the bank of suffering and despair are mechanical in their change. They're growing from the outside in. They think that if they have achievements in spite of, then they have purpose and they have success and they have value. And the reality is that your identity fuels your action. And many, many, many times we may be highly productive people, but we're highly productive in a labyrinth. We're just going in circles. We're not actually going anywhere. We're just going in circles. A lot of steps. And some people, especially my coaching clients, feel as if they really resonate with the labyrinth and they really feel as if they have no idea what it's like to sit still. And that is because they're jumping from perceived control feedback loops. And they are on the bank of suffering and despair. And no matter what is in their bank accounts, no matter how many trips they go on, no matter how many brand names they wear, no matter how big their house is, no matter how successful their partner is, they will feel empty inside because they're not going anywhere. They're in a labyrinth. They're trapped. And how do we get out of the bank of suffering and despair? How do we rewire our mind to get over to the river? Because it can feel absolutely impossible to get over to that river. Stay tuned because we're going to talk more about that in just a little bit. But right now, let's talk about what the idea of with this village. So on the bank of value, strength building, and growth, we're on a village. We have mentors and guides. We have peers and companions. We have students and proteges. We have healers and helpers. And we have these ideas of celebrants and witnesses. And this is what creates this wholeness, this sense of community that is so imperative. And this sense of community that is so imperative and that the Western culture really is missing out on. We're very individualistic in the West. We are. Acceptance. There's no shame in the game. There's no reason to judge. But we are individualistic. It's hard for us to understand what a village component is. But the reality is that when we can zoom out and focus on our own values, we can start appreciating the identity that comes with a collective mindset of this idea of villages that really propel us forward if we let it and have the right boundaries in place for it. And so it means that we are simpatico, we are working together. We have mentors and guides that are going to help join along with peers and companions, which will help to bring up the students and proteges. And the healers and helpers really create a unity amongst the entire thing. It creates the strength when the weaknesses start to show. And the celebrants and witnesses are there to help support and fill in the gaps when needed, and to tell the stories to maintain that perspective. And that's an important part of it. And this can happen with like 3 people. This can happen with 30 people. Your village is yours, but you have to get creative and you have to zoom out to see what your village is for you. And the village function is this safety net. So when you stumble or you face setbacks, the village prevents you from sliding back to the suffering bank. It creates a nice wall and stability for you. It creates that accountability, one of the main pillars of success. It allows you to stay aligned with your values and your commitments. It allows for celebration so that you can be reminded of and humbled with your purpose. It gives you a growth mindset because a learning community will allow you to have a growth mindset, to see that there is no failures, there's only learning opportunities. And an opportunity to serve, which allows you to connect with your agency, which is a major part of those universal constructs. So how do we move between the banks? As we lose focus and purpose and faith, as we start to reduce implicitly ourselves, we get on these slippery rocks, we slide into the river, and we find ourselves back on the bank of suffering and despair. And that current, that river current, will kind of float us away. And only when we can either build bridges, we can get back on the boat and paddle over, we can find that sense of agency, that sense of value, that sense of belonging, being seen and heard, and safety, will we be able to bring it all back over from the bank of suffering and despair back to the bank of value, strength building, and growth. And so we look at the negative dynamic, and when we're on the negative dynamic, when we're on those over 2,000 feedback loops, we're on the bank of suffering and despair. No matter what it looks like in your life, you're on the bank of suffering and despair. But when you realize that the only difference between the positive and the negative feedback loop is intention, then you can start setting your course for the bank of value, strength building, and growth. And my funneling model, which I wrote on Substack, so go get that article, click on the link, shows the outputs in order to find yourself in a positive feedback loop that will eventually lead you to a positive flow state. It literally outlines how we use awareness, acceptance, action as a way of going further and further into the funnel until it actually creates momentum and a positive flow state. We are secure, we are clear, we are grounded, we are connected. But in order to get there, you have to understand what your triggers are. You have to be aware of it. You have to have acceptance of the negative feedback loops, and then find action in these disruption points. And you have to consistently do that to wear yourself into the bottom. And when that happens, you start to build your village and you maintain your village as long as you are mindful on the bank of value, strength building, and growth. And if this is something that you would like to do, if this is something that you've been sharing with others and you feel like there's been a block and you're not sure what that block is, this is the video for you, and share it with others who can enjoy it. You're on the bank of suffering and despair. We all are. But only when we are intentional do we actually make it to the bank of value, strength building, and growth. And if this is something that you like, please hit the like button. Share this with others. Subscribe to my channel to get more neuroscience-based feedback and be able to actually change your brain and change your life. Thank you so much.